I'd be happy to do that. But I have some pictures and things to share with you that I put together about the sweet cherry, which is it's basically a cousin to, oops, it's a cousin to the wild black cherry that we did yesterday, and cool, great, got it. Hello. And yeah, we'll get started. So I'm going to try to get this green mark off the screen. Give me 1 second. Bloop. There we go. So, hello. Sweet cherry. Yesterday we did black cherry, and the black cherry is the native cherry tree where I live and where Liv is. And this sweet cherry is the one that I think probably most people are familiar with in terms of eating from the grocery store. So this one is actually native to Europe. And I wanted to show you the botanical drawing because I just think that botanical drawings are beautiful ways of viewing and learning about the plants that I talk about. And I encourage you all to do your own forms of botanical drawing whenever you find new things or you find things that you think are beautiful. Definitely drawing them. Even if you don't think you can draw, I bet you can draw. And it, just like everything else, it takes practice. So I like to show these old style botanical drawings as an influence to those of you who might want to learn plants and be a part of the plant world in other creative ways other than just looking at them and eating them and sitting under them and that sort of thing. So this is what we got here. This is the sweet cherry Prunus avium. This is what the leaves look like. They're serrated on the edges and they're pointy. This is what the flowers look like. I'll show you actual photos of the flowers. And this is the inside parts of the flower and the bottoms of the leaves and where the flowers and leaves come out. They're bud areas. Is Liv still here? There you go. Okay. So Liv, I did a little bit of research on what we talked about yesterday, these lenticels, because you asked a great question and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't giving you wrong information. But my guess was pretty accurate. Remember how I said that I think that they help with breathing, essentially? So that's what they are. These, all of these white markings here on cherry bark are called lenticels, and they're pores that allow for gas to be transferred between the air and the inside of the tree. So if these lenticels weren't there, if these pores weren't there, bark would be completely impenetrable. It would be, no gas would be able to be exchanged at all, and the only other respiration that would happen, the only other breathing that would happen in the tree would be in the leaves, for, during photosynthesis. So this is a really, really crucial way for, it's a crucial survival tactic, survival adaptation that trees have. And lenticels are present in all tree bark, but they just are easier to see in some tree species than in others. So they're in cherry, they are always very easy to see. Usually they're white, kind of on a much darker background, this reddish color or a brown or a grayish color. They're also very prominent, very easy to see in trees like birch trees. So have you ever seen a white birch tree that also has these like kind of blackish. They have a lot of those same markings on them. So those are like the two that are easiest to see these lenticels on, but they're on all trees. And the patterns are always different, but they are very similar within species and within the different genuses and within families. It's a really great, they're really great patterns to help to identify what you're looking at, especially when there aren't when there aren't leaves or fruits or flowers on a tree to also help you. Bark is your best year-round identification tool, and really good to learn what bark looks like, so that even when you're walking around after all the leaves have fallen off of trees, you can still figure out what you're looking at. Baron, do you have a question? No? Okay. There's something in the chat. Let me check real quick. Trying to find my chat window. Sorry. There it is. You're welcome, Liv. Liv just said thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating, and I had never really learned that before either. So I'm glad that I was that I was right, but there was a little bit more information that I needed. So back to this specific sweet cherry, Prunus avium. Remember, when I write just the P before this, it's just an abbreviation. So Prunus is the genus, and I'm just doing P period. That's just a way you can write other Prunus species that way too. So this one is native to this area of the world, and what we're looking at here is this is the Great Britain and Ireland and Scotland, and then we have Spain and Portugal over here, and France, and this is all of Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Italy, this is part of the Middle East, and this is part of North Africa. So all of these areas that are the dark green are the native range of where the sweet cherry actually comes from, where it originated from. Now it grows pretty much all over the temperate world, all over the world where it's not super, super cold or super, super tropical. It can grow all over. Of course, I'm sure many of you have them in your gardens, or you have friends that have them. My neighbor has one that's growing right next door, and I usually eat some of the cherries off of it because it hangs over my fence. This is also a map that shows you where there are a lot of breeding programs. So that means that in this native range for the sweet cherry tree, there are lots of people, probably scientists and farmers, that have orchards and these experimental sites where they're trying to grow new varieties, new cultivars and new varieties, new types of sweet cherries that are probably stronger, resistant to disease. Maybe they want ones that are shorter because they're easier to harvest from if they're shorter in full size height. Maybe they have sweeter fruit or darker red fruit, or maybe they're, I'm sure, Baron, have you ever eaten the Washington cherries that are, or I think they're called Rainier cherries? Those are sweet cherries that are a specific breed, a specific variety that comes out of your area of the world. They sell them here too on the East Coast, but I know that they're grown in Washington. There's something in the chat. I'm just having trouble finding the chat window because I have this presentation open. Where is it? Come back. Oh, come on. There it is. Oh, you can't hear me, Eliana? Can everybody else hear me? Okay. Oh, all right. So this is what your standard sweet cherry looks like. They're these big, beautiful fruits. I mean, big in comparison, I guess, to the wild black cherry that I told you all about yesterday. They are bred and they're grown for these like commercial grocery store yummy like garden varieties to be as big as possible and to be as like red and juicy and beautiful, I guess beautiful as possible, right? For people to want to grow them, for people to want to buy them. And one of the differences between them and the black cherry, the Prunus serratina that we learned about yesterday, is that the way that the fruit and the flowers grow off of the tree branches is in drupes. This word drupes is what is describing multiple fruits hanging off together in little bunches. Usually it's like 2 or 3. Rather than the black cherry, which grows in what are referred to as racemes. And that's when you have like a big cluster of flowers or a big cluster of fruit that hang off when they're all ripe. So those are 2 different ways, 2 different types of flower and fruit formation. Other times it's just single fruits that grow by themselves. Which we see a lot with apples and plums and things like that. Although some plums also have that kind of like raceme look with the like Baron, the plum that you guys have all over where you are grows like that. Some, like I said, some sweet cherries are very dark. They're almost black in color. The Bing cherries are often very, very deep, dark red. And sometimes there are varieties that are like yellowish, almost white. They call those white cherries. But most of the time they're within this color range when you see them. So this is what the flowers look like early in spring. Usually the varieties that grow edible fruit have white flowers on them. And this is just another example of the drupe kind of formation. One of the things that is so special about these cherry trees is actually that there are cherry blossom festivals that are held all over the world. Has anybody ever been to a cherry blossom festival? No. They're in various countries, and they're usually in early spring, whenever the spring is in those nations. But one of the things that's different about cherry blossom festivals and the cherries that are like cherry grocery store garden fruit cherry trees is that usually cherry blossom trees are ornamental trees. They are trees that have been bred over time for their really, really beautiful flowers, but not for having any fruit on them. So usually cherry blossom festivals are usually cherry trees that have pink flowers on them, that have been bred for these big, beautiful pink flowers. And I wanted to show you a couple photos from around the world because I just think it's really, really lovely, really wonderful. The first cherry blossom festival was in Japan, and this is a photo of what it looks like in this part of Japan when the cherry trees, all of these pink flowers are in bloom. They all bloom at the same time, and it smells really amazing. It's beautiful, and they have a specific word for it, hanami. Oh, Baron, you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, there's a whole row on the other side of the Columbia River here of just tons of those types of cherry trees, like tons of them.
Cool.
Like a whole row all the way across.
And that's like in the city of Portland, right? That's right in the city. Yeah. They're very, very common. They're planted very commonly in cities, in big urban areas and in suburban areas. Because they live and they function really well as street trees, as these ornamental, they're beautification methods. It's a really great way of making people happier. I guarantee that most people, when they see this kind of a sight and they smell those flowers, are going to be really in a better mood than they were before they saw them. So that's, it's a good tactic for in that form. They're also, when you have this many flowers, you're also really helping with pollinators and pollinating insects that need that food source. So it's really good to have this many blossoms all at one time in an urban area, maybe where there isn't a whole lot of other activity like that. I think the next picture is of Washington, D.C. Yeah, so this is right in the heart of downtown D.C. with the Washington Monument right here. And, this is just a big, beautiful site. I bet it's like probably the most beautiful time to ever be in Washington, D.C. is when these are blossoming. Philadelphia every year also has a cherry blossom festival. It's, they have like a big like concert and they have dances and people gather, I think, around the art museum area in for those of you who live in the Philly area. That's a really fun time too. So this is just a photo of what they look like in a commercial cherry orchard, what the trees look like. This is after the fruit has been harvested. You can't see any fruit, you can't see any flowers. This is what the trees look like at this time of the year, usually like in high summer. And I just wanted to show you a photo of what an orchard looks like, or what this type of commercial orchard, particular style of commercial orchard looks like, with the trees planted probably about 15 feet apart. It's pretty standard for them to be about 15 feet apart and to keep them pruned to about 15 feet tall also, so that they are most easy to harvest from. When I was growing up, I lived in a house that had a couple of cherry trees, and one of them was gigantic. It was it might have been like 30 feet tall, and its trunk was, in my little kid eyes, was gigantic, and it had a really big branch on it that I could like grab onto and climb up into. I could just kind of like monkey up into it. And it was the best thing ever. Every single year in like usually right around when school was out, so like mid-June, every year the cherries would be ripe, and I would just climb up in the tree and eat them until I got sick, because they were so good. I would just keep eating them and eating them and eating them until I had like a bellyache. And they are really like one of my favorite kinds of trees. I have all sorts of really great memories attached to that particular tree. And it was there. It had been planted, many, many years before my family lived in that house. But I think that tree is one of the reasons why I love plants as much as I do. And it's super, super fun to harvest cherries. They usually are pruned in such a way. I don't know if you can see super well from this, but the pruning of cherry trees is usually done in this fashion that's called an open cup. So if you can see from like my hands here and from these, the way that these are, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 main branches on these trees generally that are around like knee height. As you can see, a tree that was taller than this, or a tree like the one that I grew up with, that probably wasn't pruned very often at all, have these really natural, they're really great natural climbing trees. And that you can, one of the things that I'm looking forward to doing in my yard when I have full grown fruit trees is to prune them in such a way that I can climb in them and my daughter can climb in them, because it's so fun. Climbing trees is super awesome. Do you guys climb trees? Good. I figured you probably did. You seem like the type of people who would climb trees and would have parents who encourage tree climbing. I think it's a very good activity. I still try to do it whenever I can, but sometimes I get nervous of trying to get too high in a tree now that I'm older, but still super fun. I still do it whenever possible, especially if there's fruit involved. If I can get the fruit and I have to get the fruit, I will climb. So I don't think I have a huge amount left in today's class, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the health benefits of sweet cherries, of these cherries that we can buy in grocery stores and grow in our gardens. And they're pretty similar to what we learned about yesterday with the wild, with the black cherry. But they're really high in vitamin C. They have a lot of fiber in them, like most fruits do. They're good for digestion and keeping your gut healthy and happy. They have high levels of potassium in them and lots of other nourishing nutrients. I found this graphic online that shows a little bit more about the specific breakdown, the nutritional breakdown of what they give you, of what one serving of fresh cherries will give you in terms of vitamins and minerals. And they're generally overall just great for your immune system, great for fighting infections. The red color, especially the deeper the red, the deeper like black color means when fruits are that color. I know that I've talked about this before. When the deeper and darker that the skin and the flesh of these fruits are, the higher in antioxidants they are, and that's really good for us. That's a way of the fruit. That coloring is a way for the fruit to protect itself from sun damage, if that makes sense. So the fruit itself protecting itself from sun damage also does the same sort of thing for us. It protects us against the damaging effects of the sun and of eating, maybe eating things or being in polluted environments, eating food that might be contaminated, and just generally the effects of aging that are normal even for the healthiest people in the world. So they're good for helping you get a full night's sleep. They are beneficial, like I said, for the aging population, people who might have Alzheimer's disease or might be prone to the sorts of things like Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's that often come with older age. Helps to boost your mood, make you happier for all sorts of reasons. Reduces the risk of cancer, that's related to the antioxidants. The helping to relieve constipation is because they're really high in fiber, so they're just good for your digestive system in general. They are good for your eyes, that's the vitamin A and vitamin C. And generally good for your heart and your cardiovascular system. So they're overall really, really wonderful fruits for you and your families and your bodies. And I think they're pretty easy to grow. They have, we haven't talked a whole lot about like fruit, tree, and plant diseases in this class. I know that we spoke about the rust fungus specifically that one time. Would you be interested when I teach these lessons about having a couple slides of like, these are the things that can kill these trees, these are the things that aren't good for them, and like what to look out for? Okay, so maybe tomorrow I can do a little short lesson at the beginning about things that are, I can show you some photos of things that to look forward or to look for in sweet cherry trees. They have this thing that happens which is called blight, B-L-I-G-H-T, that there's they have bacterial and viral cankers, and a canker is essentially like an open wound, and sometimes you'll see like weeping in the bark of cherry trees. That means that they have this particular type of infection, and it is spread just like other viruses and other fungus, especially when it's really wet and the tree hasn't been pruned really well and there isn't enough air getting through and drying out the tree after a bunch of rain or like really high humidity. Oh yeah, and this is my recipe slide talking about, I mean, I'm sure you all know all of the many wonderful things you can do with sweet cherries, the recipes. I mean, of course, just eating them by the handfuls when they're fresh, I think is the best possible way. You just get a bunch of cherries and just shove them in your mouth. But do any of you have cherry pitters in your kitchens? Things that help to get the pits out? That's the most pain in the butt thing about cherries, is that they have the big pits in the middle that you have to get out. But if you have a cherry pitter, that really helps. Otherwise, you can just usually like pull them apart with your thumbnails and just pop the pit out. That's fine too. If you do it as a family activity, it'll happen a lot faster. I think there's something in the chat, but I keep having trouble finding the chat window. I'm sorry. Come on. There it is. It just goes away and then randomly will let me look at it again. Oh, how long does a cherry tree take to grow? That was a question from Liv. They grow pretty fast, and in my experience, you need to prune them a lot in order to keep them at that like 15 to 20 foot height. Sweet cherries, especially sour cherries, which I haven't talked about and maybe will a little bit tomorrow. That's a different species. Prunus cerasus is the sour cherry that we pretty commonly see also in gardens and grocery stores and orchards. The sour cherry, it grows much more slowly in my experience, or it's a little bit shorter just naturally. You would get cherries on a cherry tree long before it's fully mature. Usually, within like you'll get them within, the second or third year. But you'll get a really good full-size tree, probably like 7 years. 7 years is usually a good indication of like a tree that is considered mature. And then they can grow a lot longer than that. But in terms of things that we can do with cherries, I wanted to put up a couple of links that will be on my website that you'll see. My favorite thing to do with fresh cherries is just make cherry cobbler, which essentially is just getting the fresh cherries and making a big like bed of cherries in the bottom of a tray, and then making this like crazy sugary, floury, wonderful crumble thing on top. It's easy, and you usually get more cherries in a recipe like that than you would if you're making like muffins or pie or something like that. Usually it's like a heavier on the cherries kind of recipe when you're making a cobbler. And I used to do that when I was a kid. I would make cherry cobbler every year when and I made it when I was little. Nobody else would help me. So it's an easy recipe, probably one of the first things I ever baked. Something you could definitely do. If you have cherries in your area, friends with cherry trees, or if you're looking for when are they actually in season and when are they ripe, like I said, probably mid-June to late June, at least at where we live in New Jersey, but around that time. You can also do a ton of things. You can make cherry barbecue sauce. You can make cherry hot sauce. You can make a cherry relish, which is kind of like a salsa of sorts. You can flavor kombucha with cherry juice. I saw a cool recipe for cherry goat cheese ice cream, which I think is a really fun combination. And this here had something like 30 to 50 recipes, this particular link, and they all looked really, really good. There was like, cherry marinades for chicken and stuff like that as well. So I think it's a good thing to always think about the sweet, the dessert stuff, and then also the savory things that you can do with like, meat and vegetable dishes and salads and things like that. Although the sweet things are really great, and I totally have a sweet tooth and love dessert. Oh, so since we have a couple more minutes, I wanted to show you, especially Baron, that there is a species of cherry in Oregon and your whole region in the Pacific Northwest and Northern California that's called the Oregon cherry. Did you know that? No? So maybe you can go out in your area and look for it. So it's Prunus emarginata, and it's probably kind of like your equivalent to the black cherry that we learned about yesterday, the Prunus serratina that we have all over here. It seems like most people don't eat it. It's considered inedible, but I think that's because it's probably a little bit bitter. And the plums that I think you said you really like are also considered very bitter. So maybe you have maybe you like bitter flavors, and that's great. I think a lot of people don't like bitter flavors, and they're missing out on really high quality nutrition. So if you could, maybe you can go on a couple adventures and looking for this tree. I didn't have a whole lot of time to look into it, but I can keep doing some research. I wanted to show you what the cherries look like. They grow in this drupe kind of form, just like the sweet cherries we learned about today, but they're a little bit smaller. They're probably kind of like sour bitter, but the leaves look about the same. Yeah, what's your question?
Actually, I'm pretty sure that one of my neighbors who's actually behind our house, that house is behind our house on the other side of the block, has like 3 of those in their backyard, and they're huge, really good climbing trees.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. That's great. It's possible. So these cherries to me look a lot like the sour cherry, the Prunus cerasus. But if you said they're really big in your neighbor's yard, they might be this species, because the sour cherry, the Prunus cerasus, is usually a pretty small tree in my experience. So that's cool. Maybe you have them right behind you, and maybe you can try eating them this year. I would say just eat like a couple at first to make sure they don't make your belly hurt or something. But they are supposed to be edible. They're just considered to be a little bit bitter. And there is a particular type of bird called the cedar waxwing that really likes eating them. So maybe when the fruit is ripe, you can watch those trees and look at all the birds that are eating them. And deer like them too when you're in an environment that has a lot of deer. I think that is my last slide. Does anybody have other questions or have a desire to keep learning about cherries tomorrow, or do you think you want to move on? What are your thoughts on these things? Liv, you have a question? Or do you really want to keep learning about cherries? You want to keep learning about cherries?
Yes, I do.
Cool. There are lots of different Prunus species, these cherry and plum relative trees. So maybe tomorrow we can do, I'll try to do a little bit more research on this tree, the emarginata, the Oregon cherry, and a couple other wild cherry species, and maybe we can cover Prunus cerasus, the sour cherry. I think sour cherries are delicious, and they usually are more, they're usually easier to grow, because they're sour, they're not as loved by wildlife and critters that can steal them from you. So we can keep doing cherries tomorrow. I will do a little bit more research. Does anybody have questions about, I guess I'll do more about like diseases of cherry trees, so you can see pictures of that, and maybe some pest insects that love cherry trees and make them sick, things that aren't good for them, are very common, and I bet you'll be able to pick them out if you see them once you see some photos. So I'm going to pull up the chat. I'm going to try to pull up the chat again, see if there's anything in it. Come on, chat. No, nothing in there. Anybody else have any questions? We have like another 2 minutes left. Looks like Liv is typing. Here, I'm gonna stop this share here. There you go. I can also bring up, oops, this website that has all these. Oh no, where'd it go? Maybe I can't. I was gonna try to show you all of the recipes that I found, but I closed that window. I'll just put it into, I'll put it into the website. You can do spitting contests. Yes, Liv says you can do spit contests with your friends and cherry seeds. Yes, you can do that. Spitting contests are always very, very important competitions with watermelon seeds, cherry pits. And you never know, you might be planting cherries while you do that. Something that's related to seeds that I learned last night when I was learning more about cherries is the black cherry seeds. You know how yesterday I told you they're pretty weedy and they're these pioneer species and they take over. I learned something cool about them is that usually it takes 3 full years for a black cherry seed to germinate after it hits the ground. So it probably has been sitting in my yard waiting for me to give it the proper conditions. And I've lived here for 3 years. So those seeds probably fell the year that I moved in or the year before I moved in here. And just now this year when I'm making my garden really, healthy, they're like, oh yeah, time for me to grow. So that's pretty interesting adaptation that these plants have. So that was my last fact of the day. I hope y'all have a good afternoon and go out and find some cool plants, and I can't wait to see you again tomorrow. We'll do more with cherries. It was good to see you all.